Resurrection Sunday, April 2023. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. John 20:15-18. Mary. Mary, whose name means bitter, tasted the salt of her own tears, and they were bitter indeed. On the first day of the week after Jesus had been so cruelly executed, Mary knew that she could not sleep, would not sleep, as the black, dark night draped over the world. Only 3 days before, Jesus had breathed his last upon that wretched cross, and Mary had seen him writhing there in agony. His voice had the crooked crack of broken breath. It garbled his words, and phlegm, blood, and spit jetted between his clenched teeth. She saw how he shook with all that trauma to his flesh, his torn skin, his hair matted with clotted gore and sour sweat. He twisted himself to find relief from the pain in his wrists and the dislocation of his feet. He trembled and gasped for air to stave off suffocation in the late afternoon on Friday past. Mary watched in horror as he hung there naked, befouled but blameless, reviled but righteous. She saw his mother clutching her chest, her eyes closed shut against the sight of the savage beating that had clawed him within a breath of his death. Mary Magdalene, early on in Jesus' ministry about the Galilee, had noticed something strange and inexplicable about that man. She could not say that he was charming, because that would fail to capture the gravitas of his presence. It fell short, far short of his supreme authority, his power to cast out demons and to raise the dead. Mary knew better, that no man could work such signs because of his sparkling personality. Mary had heard him preach many times, and every time she had leaned into his words with an eager heart and a raptured mind. He preached and he taught as no one she had ever heard before, not as the scribes and not as the Pharisees. Of that she was sure. His word had never been dull, listless, or void of nerve. It was electric, vital, and full of verve. When Jesus spoke, she seemed to be on the edge between crawling on the earth and soaring like a bird. It was as though Jesus had given her permission to be her own person, to seek her own path to the heart of God. But then came the day when Mary had baked some bread, and she saw how famished Jesus looked, and the men too he had gathered round him. She screwed up her courage and approached from within the crowd. She came close enough to hand him a bit of her loaf, a bit of it torn from the side. He reached out his hand to receive what she had offered, took a silent moment to make his grace, gazed into her eyes appreciatively, and at the taste he marveled and called her by her name that day, as if to say approvingly, "Girl, you stuck your foot in that." Mary remembered how it made her feel to have Jesus call her name that way. He made her feel like somebody, made her feel like the trees that dance when the wind blows against them, fierce and hot, like the broad-chested mountains that dress themselves with skirts of snow and frost, like the frothing waters that rise and roll when the moon tugs at them from beyond the cloud-crowded sky. Jesus had that way to make her large when he had her name in his mouth. But then came Friday, and Jesus could not call her name because his endurance began to snap. His back had blistered and the whipping had not helped. The wounds were deepened by the piercing, stabbing bark of that rugged cross. If he tried to pull himself up by the nails that fixed his arms stretched wide, the pain shot through him from toe to brow. If he tried to relax and bent his knees, his windpipe closed and he thought he might drown in his own spit and blood. Mary, whose name means drop of the sea, felt one drop and then another as the sea began to pour from out her eyes. Jesus peered into heaven, and from his dry, parched lips, she heard him say at last, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Mary watched as he groaned, and then his body fell slack, without tremor and without strain. It buffeted Mary, knocked her flat, made her feel she wanted to die. In that moment of abject loss, she realized just how much she had come to love that gentle man from Nazareth, the water-riding preacher whose pulpit became a fishing skiff hauled out to sea. Mary withdrew from the foot of that cross only after Joseph and Nicodemus had let him down from the cross, catching his limp, dead body in a clean, white, winding sheet. They placed the corpse in a borrowed tomb. A team of draft horses were made to use haunch and heart to drag a massive boulder to seal the gaping grave. Sentries were posted to watch overnight, and even the cock refused to crow to signal the break of dawn. But Mary could not sleep, would not sleep, and she knew why. Her nerves were shot and her eyes were sore from crying. Her agitated mind raced against her despairing heart, and finally she knew what she must do. Like Nicodemus, who searched him out in the middle of the night, Mary went off to the tomb while the whole city slumbered. She had not thought it through altogether. How to circumvent the guards, how to find the right grave marked "Do Not Pass." She had not even considered what to do with the stone, that brute, mute, unfeeling, impenetrable stone. Once she had arrived at the death-steel garden, it came to her in a flash that she possessed no earthly power to unseal the grave, to lift or even so much as to budge that stone away. But alas, astonishment seized her at the sight of the stone setting adrift from its mooring at the hole. Wonders and wild imaginings flooded her mind as she suspected that the grave had been robbed, that her precious Jesus had been stolen away. But for what purpose? Toward what unholy end? She did the only thing her whole being screamed to do, to run and tell it true that Jesus was no longer bound to the grave. She did not permit herself to believe that Jesus had done just what he said he would do, that he had raised himself from out of death's fierce and lethal hold. So she put it to Peter and John, and the question she raised infected them too. Is he risen? Is he, as he said? They raced each other to see for themselves that open wound in the earth. John arrived there first, but had not the nerve to look within. Peter came on and did not wait, but blindly, boldly broke the invisible wall between the quick and the dead. With his hand affixed to the outer cleft, he stepped within as a faint light began to shine. As he backed out again, he kept muttering, "No, no, no," imagining the worst. And then, just as quickly, "Yes, yes, yes," as he began to give birth to a newfound faith. Neither man lingered in the garden of the dead, but returned home to nurse his hopes and to quell his raging doubts and fears. But Mary was drawn, pulled along the trackless path to stand once more before the grave. The dark of night began to peel away, and as she bent down to peer within the hollow hall, Mary spied two men dressed in white, the color of light, sitting there, one at the head and the other at the foot. Mary held her breath, but she did not flee. She did not run. They wanted to know why she was weeping. And just as she began to answer, she could feel the presence from behind her of a third man. She wheeled round to see, and she gazed upon a figure she did not know. He put to her the very same question, as though she had no real reason for weeping so. He called her name, Mary, which means beloved. And in that instant, she knew it was him. She knew how her name sounded in his mouth, the way that he alone could call it. Not to condemn, nor to rebuke, not to belittle, nor to diminish. He called her name, and the way it sounded called her into power, into the heart of care, in the bloom of love. The sky opened overhead, and the cock-a-doodle-doo of some rooster raised the sun from behind the Judean hills. Mary knew that resurrection was real, not because it was doctrine, teaching, or catechism, not because it was theology systematically expounded or philosophically justified. No, she had not taken hold of the idea of resurrection, but the resurrection of Jesus had taken hold of her. She heard her name called in love divine and affection profound. Jesus called her name to bring her to attention, to summon her into the lived reality of the power of love, to solicit her assistance in heralding the good news of love, breaking the iron hold of death. Mary, go and tell it. How love has slipped the knot to strangle love. How death, grisly, gruesome, grindle-grinding death, had met its match just when it thought it had Jesus pinned against the grimy dust. Go and tell it. I hear Mary's story as her friends had heard it so many centuries ago. But her story makes me listen for my name being called, my name, Edward, which in Old English means wealthy guardian. But when I hear it in the mouth of God, as I have heard it so many times, it sounds like a commissioning to be the guardian of good fortune. I have a lived experience of joy out of suffering, of a way being made out of no way, of the sway of storm unto peace and calm. I have not read this to believe it. I have lived it to believe it, and believed it so that I might live and live more abundantly. This has been my good fortune, to live the meaning of Jesus' resurrection, to guard it with all my strength, all my heart, all my soul, and all my mind. The resurrection has a hold of me, because I have heard God call my name as Jesus called Mary 20 centuries past. And for many centuries yet to come, Jesus continues to call each of us by name from the garden of the dead into the garden of the living, where the sting of death is no more. Listen, listen. Do you hear your name being called? Hallelujah and amen.